Okay. All right. Right. Good. These crazy people. Okay. Indiana Jones reference. There you go, for free. All right. But this is the game. We're going to be thinking about a couple of pieces. One is basically when you have these things specified, right? The number of nodes and then the number of edges, and the nodes are labeled. It's important, right? So they've got names. Or it's, node A, B, C, D, whatever you like. And then we get into trouble because our alphabet runs out. They're labeled, and so the links aren't labeled though, so that's important. But we're going to think about all possible configurations. All right, we're going to have a box of them, and we're going to pull one out at a time and then look at it and so on. And then the game will be sort of just to move out from that. So we'll be interested in a really beautiful part of all of this is bipartite structures, right? So we have two kinds of things, maybe boards and directors, or actors and movies. And you think about the degree of randomness involved in the connections of those things. But we can construct random ones. So this is something obviously we're not going to do this, but you could cut it out. The idea here is this is actually every possible network for just 3 nodes, right? So we can have no one has any friends, and then the fully connected one over here, and each one has probability, right, equal probability. So that's a fun thing to make. But what we're going to do is be in a category where we know the number of edges. So it might be we're restricted to these 3 sides here, or these 3, right, where there's 1 edge, and in this case, 2 edges. So that's not very exciting, but of course we look for a large N, and then we end up with it becomes hard to tell that we don't have a polyhedron. We have a polyhedron. We in fact have a ball. That was in Gravity Falls, right? The infinity-sided dice. Yeah. Okay. Which is a bit like Borges' Book of Sands, right? So you're always going to get something different. Okay, so basic things. So we're going to have a set of networks. They're labeled nodes, M edges, and what we'll call a standard random network, or what will be often referred to in the literature by many people as an Edish-Rennie random network, because of the humans involved, will be one of these networks. So each one is equally probable. Right, so this is just the basis, this is where we start from. And the number of, that little thing I just showed you that you could roll, that 8-sided die, that's fun, but it really, when you think about networks in general, like the really important pieces are the number of nodes and the number of edges, right? So if you've got a real one and you want to compare it to some artificial ones, you really need to hold those things constant, or do some smart scaling, right? So, okay, ER graphs, all right? Equi-probability, equi-things, good assumptions. Physics is full of it. Lots of equi-partitioning of things. All right, so number of possible edges goes from 0, if we can have 0 friends, and then n choose 2, where everyone is connected to everyone else. And we're usually interested in the sparse ones, fully connected. And then the number of networks with n labeled nodes grows enormously, right? So there are n choose 2 possible edges, and they could be either on or off. So we have 2 states for each possible edge, and then we multiply them all together. Again, these are labeled graphs, right? You get into all sorts of fun if you don't do that, right? If you start to think about isomorphisms, that's not what we're doing. And it's very beautiful. Okay, and then you can play around with this a little bit. So this is great, like e to the n squared, which is, kaboosh. It's the technical term. Okay, so if we have m edges, then there are n choose 2 places, right? So there are n choose 2 possible edges. You have m that you're going to place down. So this is how many we have to choose from. So we have n choose 2, choose m. And that's a little thing you can mess around with, Stirling's approximation and so on, some factorials, and figure out how that thing grows, and it grows nastily, right? This is basically an n squared choose m. So, lots of possible networks. So that's this. So we've got this box here, and you know, every network you can think of, and these are unlabeled edges and so on. So we're not worried about the node size or whatever and weights and things. But imagine you have some real network, which is, you know, been stripped of possible information, but it's like that. You know, what's the chance that you pull that one out of a box that has the right number of nodes and the right number of edges written on it, right? So we've got these set of boxes. You know, n equals 7, m equals 4, or n equals 1,000,000, and m equals 100,000. You know, you have your real one over here, and you say, okay, what's the chance that I get something like that, right? Yeah. And we know from earlier stuff in POX, right, a lot of the real ones are pretty structured, right? They're power law size distributions for degree. Depends who you ask on Twitter, I suppose, but their scale, they're heavy-tailed distributions, right? Academics are such fun people. Okay, so of course, yes, this big piece. The real world networks that we often think about, they're sparse, right? And you know, usually that's based in links being costly, but also, even if they weren't, it's useful to have sparseness actually, because if you're all connected to everything else, then you know everything kind of explodes. You have to continually make choices on how to make the network function.